Okay, thank you, Josh. I'm waiting for the message. There we go. Okay, are you looking at my startup screen?
Yes, we are.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for a nice introduction, Josh. Let me start by saying to those of you who are here that this is an exciting time for you to be learning about and preparing for decision modeling in your organization. I notice a couple of familiar names, so perhaps you've tried some decision modeling already, but I find that most people have not. But now that decision modeling has been promoted to an OMG standard, it's time to take a look at it, at the standard, and at the world of decision modeling today. So I think we're at a really, really interesting point in time, because we've been doing decision modeling since around 2006, and we have been successful almost 100% of the time. So we have great stories to tell you. So the fact that we now have a standard for what we already know works extremely well makes it easier for you folks to attempt it and try it in your organization, and to introduce it even to your IT organizations, because it's an IT standard. So here's a little bit about me, which I think you guys know already. And so I wanted to start off by saying the decision model and notation, and that's the OMG standard, DMN, may be one of, and maybe the most significant OMG standard to date. And I say that because I'm very excited about it, but I will also give you some reasons from our experience why we think decision modeling changes everything we're doing today, including business practices. So based on our experience, decision modeling is a skill, and now it's justified that supporting software has the potential to change businesses and technology directions in ways that most of you may not have imagined, and to be honest with you, in ways that I never imagined. I'm so impressed with our client base and the stories that they share, and I'll explain to you why they don't share them publicly, but it has been quite an interesting trip so far. I'll also say that both Larry Goldberg and myself, who we both were the co-inventors of the decision model, we were members of the OMG DMN subcommittee. We were invited to join the committee, so we had a voice in that standard also. And I'll mention one other thing, which I'll mention one more time. We are also co-inventors with another new model that you might start to hear about, called the events model. And that is based on the TDM principles and science, and will addresses the detection of events that happen, not just making decisions, in a regular business process, but to detect fraud based on a series of events that seem suspicious. I'm not going to talk about it much in this webinar, but it does look like there's been a lot of interest in that model, and it has been tested over in Europe. So, so we're very excited about that too. So before I go on to the next page, I just wanted to say that decision modeling addresses a hurdle that's been a pain point for most of us forever, but it does even more than that. It's much more than just giving us a new model, because it's actually changing the way we make business changes, and I'll share some stories with you. So here are the bullets that I had included in my description, but I put them in a different sequence because the flow was better. So first I'm going to cover the critical milestones and developments that led to where we are today. And then I'm going to talk to you, or give you examples of the kinds of decision models that are in production today in at least 5 or 6 of the top 10 corporations in the world. And so I want you to understand this is not an unknown science. This is not something that isn't currently working hugely today. And part 3, I'm going to take a quick look at TDM and DMN. They're different, and the future is anybody's guess. So I would invite you to come on May 12th. I'd love to have a conversation with you as to where you think we'll be 12 months from now in the decision modeling space. And then I'll leave you with a simple guide for how to talk to your organization about adopting decision modeling. You don't have to jump full force into everything, a full life cycle development of decision models. You can take a step-by-step approach. So we'll talk about that. So here are I'm going to talk about the critical milestones. The point is that decision modeling did not happen overnight, and some of you who know me, you know how long I've been doing this. And it took time to formulate the idea that we needed a new model, that there was a model that IT and business didn't have out there that would address some of our problems. And so the question came up, many years ago, what should it look like, and who on earth would actually use the decision models or create them? I was actually wrong as to who would create them. So we can talk about that in the question and answer period, but it does turn out to be business analysts and sometimes business people, but there are new roles, decision modelers and glossary administrators, that are now appearing in the decision modeling space who will also create decision models. So to me, I'll just put something out there. DMN is a standard, which is really great, and it is an IT standard. So it was taking a look at decision modeling from an IT perspective. The decision model did not have an IT perspective. The decision model came about because I looked at decision modeling as a new science, not just a practice and software. And so it is the result, all of the things that are in our book about the decision model actually borrowed from other disciplines that we have had over time, because I took the best pieces of them and tried to put them into a model that would be that would lead us into a new age and would give stability to the decision modeling age. So I know this is a busy page, but let me just walk through a couple of these things, because this is the untold story of how I came to the decision model, which was the precursor to the OMG. And so first, the decision model inherits valuable properties from the relational model, because that's sort of where my career began, I guess, and it applies those concepts to logic and regulatory requirements instead of to data. So the decision model is very, very much like the relational model, except that it's not modeling data, so that's kind of an interesting twist. It was important that it be based on the relational model because the relational model was the first model that was defined before there was any software for it. It was strictly an intellectual brainstorm by Dr. Codd. It's also rooted in the science of set theory, relational algebra and calculus, and normalization, and you don't even need to know what those mean, just need to understand the value of them. So basically the decision model inherits science from the relational model, specifically the dimensional structure, the principles for that structure, such as like primary key and foreign key relationships, and all the normal forms. We have in the book up to 3 normal forms, but we have found a 4th normal form in the real world. So that's very nice parallel, and it means that it's a very stable model. It's not just a picture. But the decision model in our book also borrows from artificial intelligence and formal logic theory, because business rules and business policies are expressed as logic, conditions leading to conclusion. And there's a whole science about that. There are different kinds of logic. There are different ways to transform logic from a complex form to a simple form. And so we needed to study that and understand how do we take, natural language and conditions and conclusions and transform it into the easiest and the simplest expressions so that we can automate them. And so that's the second part. And then afterwards came the business rules approach. And there are many business rules approaches, that's useful to some extent, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But what the decision model inherited from the business rule approach, the business rule approach struggled with making business rules understandable to the business audience and also automatable. So we had to address both audiences, and so we decided the decision model needs to address the business first, because the business people own the logic. They're the ones who either come up with it or are responsible to be compliant with it when it's regulatory requirements. So we focus on the business side, not on the technology side. Although it turns out the decision model is very automatable, just like the relational model was, even though it wasn't based in technology to begin with. And so these 3 routes resulted in the decision model. Now the next step then, shown on this page, is the OMG. So the OMG said, we need to have this is an interesting new model. We need to have something like this model. And they had decision tables and things like that in practice, but they said we need to make something formal. And they took it from an IT perspective and a business perspective, and their goals are different. Their goals were to create a common meta model. Their goals were to allow exchangeability of decision models, and their goals were to accommodate many different kinds of decision expressions, including those that aren't automatable, interestingly enough. So what you have is the decision model is a very pure model of logic, and the OMG DMN is a little bit broader. And part of being broad means it's not as rigorous. So as I go through this presentation, they're different. Then they both have value, and they can both borrow from each other, which is even more exciting, or benefit from each other. And then the next horizon I mentioned are event models, and I have published a two-part series in Modern Analyst on the event model, and the event model was just accepted at the DEBS conference in California as a new model, and they will be presenting an actual experience of using it for cell phone fraud in Europe. And it was used by multiple countries and was quite successful. So that's a new model that's in the same stage as the decision model, in that it was not meant at first to relate to technology. It was a model for the business people, compliance people, people who are looking for terrorists and things like that, for them to specify their event detection, and then IT to take that and create automated code from it. That was how the decision model started. The decision model today, you can generate code directly from decision models and towards different technologies, but it did not do that for many, many years. So let's see. Page forward here. So the question is, are we here yet? Is decision modeling for everyone? And I wanted to point out, these are some of the things that our marketing people say that they see out there. The phrases business logic and decision logic are now replacing the phrase business rules in many places. And logic is now represented as a business and software asset in many places. Analysts, Gartner, Forrester, etc., are now acknowledging this and making predictions as to a new marketplace. We know that global large customers are adopting it, huge customers are adopting it. We now have a standard from the OMG. There are new tools appearing on the market, and there will be many more, I think. And if you look at some of the vendors who have been part of OMG and who are working on DMN 1.1, you have major software vendors are making serious investments in decision modeling software. And then the latest was just last week at BPMN Next conference, it was said that decision management's time is now. So it sounds to me like, yes, we are there. We are at the tip of the iceberg, but it's a big iceberg. So I wanted to point out to you the kinds of decision models in production today prior to DMN, because if you go out there and if you want to talk to your organizations about DMN production models, there really aren't too many. It's a new standard, and companies are just starting to learn how to do it, and some of them are, have pilots going on. But we have a lot of major success stories, so it's important for you to understand that, so that it's not so scary for your organization to start thinking about it. So let's understand now on the next page what kinds of decision models are operating every day around the world already, so that you can feel confident introducing the idea of decision models to your organization. So here are some decision models that are in production, and these are since 2009, because that's when the book became public. So there was a big jump in decision models there. We did have customers before it, before 2009, who were testing it before we wrote the book, and they did contribute to the decision model as written in the book, so we're grateful to them. And so you can see that these are widely used in the mortgage industry. Freddie Mac in particular has gotten on record as how much it has changed their business. Retail banking, investment banking, fraud detection, and a big part of it today is data quality or data acceptance, just validating data coming into applications. So if you are in one of these industries and you are familiar with some of these types of applications, then you understand the complexity of these things, and you can imagine the robustness of the corresponding decision models. I am really surprised at the maturity of the decision models that our clients are creating. I have never created decision models like they have, so that's really exciting. But regardless of your industry, there are three major types of decisions that benefit substantially from decision modeling, and these are relevant to almost every single industry. So sometimes people say, what is a decision? What is a decision model? What kind of thing am I talking about? So we kind of organize them into three different types of decisions that are most related or benefit from decision models. So the first kind is regulatory requirements, and these, of course, are imposed on your organization from an external source. So they're not under your organization's control, which makes them very stressful, right? This page has 3 industries that are very rich in regulatory requirements: banking, mortgage, and insurance. And by the way, we've also been doing work in the Obamacare space too. And so this page shows some significant regulations that have been turned into decision models and are running in production today. Of course, these kinds of requirements are well suited for decision models because their logic is complex, they're voluminous, they're interrelated, probably oftentimes ambiguous, right? And they need to be traced, they need to be justified. The second kind of decision is an operational decision, which are conclusions that your organization or systems reach in the context of a process or a system. So they do originate within your organization, and they're under your organization's control, but they're still conditions that lead to conclusions. So examples on this page are shown for processing medical claims, what kinds of decisions are made, core banking, when do you close it down an account, those kinds of things. The third kind of change may surprise you, and it surprised me. It's transformational change, which is a radical change in business. Okay, transformational change is a big change, not simply a small change, and it actually delivers a new business state. And this kind of change may be needed to turn around a business that's in crisis, if you can remember the mortgage situation in the years 2008, 2009, or to reposition an organization in a market where it has lost ground or is failing. So the good news, if you understand these 3 types of things that go on possibly in your industry or in your organization, that there are decision models today that are operating every day successfully for all 3 types of these decisions. And here's the interesting part for me. Many of them were built, designed, and put into production before there was any decision model standard and before there was any software for it. I had the dubious role of reviewing people's decision models in the early days, and I manually went through Visio and Excel and mapped and looked at those decision models versus the principles in our book to find errors. We did that all manually, and some of those decision models are still in existence today and still out there working. So the decision model itself is quite successful. Decision model with software is even more so. So we've come a long way. So now let's move to the decision model and the OMG's new standard. And I'm going to start with the decision model because that was the beginning of the journey. And then I'm going to explain to you the differences between the 2 models and why they're different. Okay, so before there were decision models, we had business rules. And before we were business rules, though, it was even worse, right? Before business rules, we just had data and process, and the business rules and the decision logic were buried. They were in every tier. They were in every way you could document them, and they became part of the big world of application code or business rule engine code. So at some point, the idea surfaced that we should separate business rules and logic from the rest of things, and most organizations did this by adopting a business rules approach, and there are many different kinds, but most of them start with either a spreadsheet or a Word document or a requirements tool that has a list of business rules that sometimes include natural language, sometimes includes code, and roughly groups them in different ways. So the question that we were facing around 2006, there's got to be a better way. So it became apparent that managing long lists of business rules was eerily similar to how we once upon a time managed long lists of data elements in the 1960s. And how did we fix that problem? Those of you who are, my age, the relational model gave us a better solution, and so that's where we started looking. Let's see if we could do something like that, and what would it look like, and who would use it. So for those of you who have been through an introduction to the decision model, I will make this as painless as possible. But the first came TDM as a decision model, and can it work? So let me just show you how to read the diagram. Then I'm going to share with you a recent real-world example and how much time was cut off in actually doing it with the decision model instead of the old way. So here's what one looks like. It has 2 pieces related to each other. One is a skeletal diagram, which is shown as the blue octagon and the green tablet shape. And the other is a detailed logic table shown on the bottom of this page. So these tables on the bottom of the page are called rule families. In DMN, this is called a decision. DMN would call this decision table here a decision. So we have a slight nomenclature difference. All the rule families in the decision model have one conclusion column, and right here you can see the conclusion column is policy renewal method. So what that means is this green tablet shaped thing has the logic behind it to come to a conclusion about how we're going to renew a policy that's coming up for expiration. So in our process model, maybe we would find an expiring policy, and then we would kick off this decision model that says, oh, am I going to go through the automatic system, or am I going to send it to the underwriters? And so this rule family also has 3 conditions here. So we have policy pricing within bounds, policy underwriting risk, and policy manual indicator. So we have 3 conditions leading to one conclusion. And so if we look at the green tablet shape, the policy renewal method at the top of that shape is nothing more than the conclusion column heading, and the other 3 are exactly the 3 conditions. But if we're just looking at the diagram with the tablet, we don't actually know what the logic is. We don't know what we're testing, the values we're testing for. We only know the things that are important to us. Apparently, the policy pricing is important, the risk is important, and an underwriting indicator is important. But we don't know what their values are or what we're testing for. We have to look at the table itself. Another one thing to know about this diagram is, of course, the conclusion, the name of the condition or conclusion column in the top is the same name as the conclusion column in the table, and the other 3 other conditions. You notice that 2 of the conditions, or let's look at one of the conditions, policy manual underwriting indicator, is under the dotted line. That tells us that the values for it are coming into us from a raw data source. So we put it under the dotted line, and we have it here in the table. The other 2 that are above the dotted line and below the conclusion, they are not coming to us as raw data. Instead, they are conclusions in their own table. So we will have 2 other rule family tables, one with policy pricing within bounds as the conclusion, and one with policy underwriting risk as a conclusion, and that will form a branch in our model. So this is much like primary keys and foreign keys in a relational model. So these relationships where the conclusion of one rule family is a condition in another one is the glue that holds everything together, right? Just like the foreign keys are the glues that hold a relational table or model together. So the way you create your models is you apply the decision model principles, which include normalization, to your logic, and based on those, they guide you in creating the optimum collection of rule families in your model. So let's see quickly how you can traverse through a model. Here you can see that the conditions in one rule family serve as conclusions in another, and that's why we have these very nicely organized branches. And here you can see branches that are very pleasant. It's easy to find things in here. If you want to look at the policy renewal method table, if you were using software, you click on it and you see it on the right-hand side. And so you can easily navigate the structure, and then you can dive into the detail. But what that means is you can create the structure without having the detail. You can take a guess. So it's very nice for agile approaches. I don't have to know all the answers at once. I can just take a guess at my conditions and conclusions and how they match. And then when I start creating my rule families, I may have to change my structure as I learn about the true logic, but I don't have to get buried in the weeds up front. So it's a very interesting, agile, iterative approach. One other thing to know about the decision model is the condition columns are always ANDed together to get to a conclusion. So the policy manual underwriting indicator is off, and the policy pricing within bounds is yes, then we are assigning the underwriting risk to be acceptable. So there are no ors in the table. It's one of our principles, and we have ways of getting rid of ors, and we do that with the science of formal logic. The science of formal logic transforms is we reduce the logic in what's called disjunctive normal form. You don't need to know that word, you just need to know how to do it. But what was really interesting to us not totally anticipated was the impact of doing decision models on process models. So here is an example. This was many of you might have seen this before. You might have seen it on a webinar or in our book. But the model on the left before the decision model was a real process model at one of our clients. And so it turned into the process model on the right simply by creating decision models instead. So all of these things, what people tend to do is those branches you saw in the decision model, if you don't know about decision models, you make those process flows. We go from one of those tablets to another via a process arrow in a process model. And it's not process at all. It's decisioning. It's thinking. So when you're able to do that, we just put a little notation in the process task. It says the behind one of these that has this octagon is an entire decision model that executes. It could be 100 rule families, but the process model doesn't care. Right? The process model says, go tell me how to process this particular application. Tell me if they're eligible for a mortgage. And you might execute 100 rule families and come back with the answer. And why that's interesting is this separation means you can now change your decision logic without changing your process because you haven't buried it in the process. And you can now change your process without changing the decision logic. So you get a lot of flexibility there. In fact, a lot of our case studies, we're able to take let's say multiple process models for different regions of the country, create one process model, and they call the appropriate decision models for that region because the process wasn't different. The logic was different, and we're able to separate that. So these benefits are significant, and let me just point out to you, we know because we've spent years doing this without software. So don't be afraid to do this without software. One of our organizations measured that creating decision models manually with Visio and Excel instead of managing business rule spreadsheets was 2.5 times faster, even without software. So even if you just do Visio and Excel, you will find some great benefits. So let me, this is a real-world example that I was just introduced to a couple of weeks ago. And one difference here is this applies to the decision model in Sapiens Decision. So you're going to get more productivity because you have an automated tool. But let me explain to you how it works. The initial project prior to decision modeling using business rules approach involved 2 analysts for 12 weeks to review 15,000 rules. And then they gave up. The result of what they had was incomplete, inconsistent, unsuitable, and not reusable. So we started from scratch with decision models and then took only 3 weeks with 2 decision modelers to reduce those 15,000 rules to 24 decision models comprised of 149 total rule families. So those are the numbers. Those are the kind of real-world numbers out there. The logic was validated against all of the decision model principles with the software, so it points out all the places where there are gaps, overlaps, expressions that make no sense, and then they remove the errors, and then they generated over 35,000 test cases automatically generated just by being able to look at rule families, rule family tables, and the glossary. Now, when I talk on May 12th, I'm going to show you how that's possible. How is it possible to automatically generate test cases from a decision model? Because you have all the information about the input data and what you're doing with it, so we can generate, and so they were able to test them, generate them and test them in that short amount of time. And then they turned it over to IT for deploying, but the testing went very fast. They just knocked out a lot of the testing. So this is a significant jump. This is why I say I think there's huge benefit in decision modeling going forward for both business and IT. And it's already doing this, so this is not this is how we think it's going to work. This is actually working. So I'm not going to go through the principles of the decision model. I'll go through some of those on May 12th. But basically it asks, looks for these things. Are there overlaps in the logic? Are there gaps? I'm talking about in one rule family or an entire decision model of maybe, let's say, 50 rule families. Are there any gaps? Are there unnecessary redundancies? Are there broken links from one rule family to another? Is there circular logic? Are there expressions that don't make sense for a specific data type, and then does it violate any normal forms? So all of these principles are in our book in table 12.2, and we have had only a few minor additions to individual principles. We have had no new principles. So that's pretty nice. So let's move on to the DMN story, which I think, and we at Sapiens all think, is exciting news for everyone. It's challenging. It's challenging for us because we already have something out there that's not DMN. So, but it's very exciting. DMN stands for Decision Model and Notation, and it's a standard created and maintained by the OMG group, which is an IT standards group. They sought proposals, and they formed a committee, and then we joined the committee. So DMN 1.0 was published in 2014, and DMN 1.1 is in progress now. I am not on the committee for DMN 1.1, but Gil Ronen, who works for Sapiens, is a member of that committee. And we are very excited about DMN because it reinforces what we have already known, that decision modeling is a recognized and needed skill, that it has significant benefits from supporting software. And while TDM and DMN are somewhat similar, their differences at this point in time are very interesting, and they together improve each other. And in other words, using both is better than using one or the other. So why is DMN important? Why do I say that it's that important? First of all, it's an IT community standard, and everyone on the OMG team was an IT professional. I kind of consider myself in the past having been an IT professional. And why is this a good thing? Because historically, while we were introducing the decision model to major corporations, business people and analysts gravitated to it naturally because it made sense, and because we made it for them, we created it for them. The biggest resistance we got were from IT groups. First of all, they said, whoa, what is this thing? Never saw this thing before. Doesn't have any software for it. And then even if there were, we had some partners who created software. They were small vendors. So having an IT standard is a really good thing. It helps us introduce the decision model into organizations and to have IT say, okay, this is good, we need to look at this. Second, it's a standard for a practice that isn't new. Decision modeling is not new, it's many years old, but now it has a standard for it, so that's good. And then third, it elevates decision management to a legitimate IT space where vendors can now try to carve out their niche. And it ushers in an era of living decision models, and I'm going to end up with that in the presentation, is these models are not just requirements, deliverables that you hand over to IT, and they find the data sources and they generate the code, and then when you make changes, some people go to the code and make the changes. We don't do that anymore. None of our clients do that anymore. The decision models are the system. They are where all changes are made because it's easy to get them into production. It's not, recoding everything. It's very easy, and there's a full life cycle that's defined, and it's very agile. And I also say it opens the door to future innovation. I believe the event model will become real in the next couple of years, and I believe that other kinds of models, if you look at what the analysts are saying, they're talking about more intelligent decisioning. And I believe that the DMN and TDM is the place where these models are going to get their start. So DMN and TDM are just the first step, but they're exciting. Okay, so what is DMN modeling? So DMN modeling, most of the document is for IT people. They have all kinds of meta model and things like that. But we care, right, for this group, the modeling notation. The first thing you need to know is that a DMN model connects to a business process model. Instead of our little octagon we have, they have a little decision table icon. So that's fine. We can all do that. It has now on the right-hand side is more interesting. They have a decision requirements diagram. And in this decision requirements diagram, these rectangles are essentially the equivalent of our rule families. In other words, we can redo this diagram by making each of our rule families one of these rectangles. And then they have other things. They have data. This application on the bottom, it shows that there's application data coming in here, and then we could put knowledge sources like such. There's a reference document for this particular rectangle, or there's a person we've spoken to. So the decision requirements diagram has this big diagram. It has more than just decisions in it, and it has a detailed logic. It has several types of decision tables, which are sort of analogous to our rule family tables. And you can also have in these rectangles, instead of logic, conditions, and conclusions, you can have natural language. You can have Java. You can have, any kind of code. You can put anything in those rectangles, which is fine because it's meant to help all different kinds of decisioning. It's not just limited to logic. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about DMN, you can read the spec, but that's not the best place to go. It's really a lot of IT in there. But Bruce Silver just published a book called DMN Method and Style. So if you might know him from the BPMN book. And a lot of his case studies were provided by Gil Ronan of Sapiens. So you can learn more about the syntax of the diagram. So they have different objectives. And some similarities and some differences. So current DMN and Sapiens decision. So what we can do in Sapiens decision today is here is a decision model based on TDM, and you now can know how to read this with the octagon, and these are the conditions leading to the conclusion. And that same exact diagram would look like the one on the right-hand side in DMN. So there is a way to go from TDM to DMN. There isn't always a way to go from DMN to TDM because some of the decisions in your DMN model may not be logic. They might not be rigorous. So we can't always go that way, right? So it really depends on what's going to be in your DMN model, whether we can translate or not. So basically, in concept, the notation is different. And of course, you can keep your eye out for future announcements. But what's important are the differences are by design. Remember that TDM was designed for business people and DMN was designed by IT people for business people and for interchangeability. So the decision model is a formal logic model like the relational model is a formal logic model with principles for validating the correctness. That's the one thing DMN does not have. DMN does not have principles for finding errors, does not include normal forms. The question always comes up. People say, well, I want to apply the TDM principles to my DMN models. Well, if you come on May 12th, I'll show you one of our models, and I'll show you it to you in DMN. And one of the problems is they don't differentiate the operators from the operand, so I can't tell if expressions in DMN are correct or not with software or even with my eyes because it's all like freeform in the cells. So if they become more rigorous with their syntax, then we would be able to apply our principles to it. So that's one of the differences, the principles. The methodology, there's no methodology with DMN, so that means you're going to create your own. With TDM, we have a very practice methodology that works. It's based on the Agile approach, but if clients aren't using the Agile approach, that's fine. We just use Agile for the decision model part. TDM is very rigorous, and DMN is not always rigorous. And DMN, they've defined a new expression language that all the technology vendors are supposed to adopt so that they can deploy to any technology. So today, people are trying to figure out whether all these vendors are going to actually adopt the FEEL language. Sapiens Decision doesn't do FEEL language today, but we have adapters for all the different target technology. So we have organizations that have deployed decision models to Joules, to ODM, IBM's ODM, to FICO, to Java. So we don't need the same language to do that, but that's the way DMN is approaching it. And the one thing they don't have, and I'm sure they'll have at some point, they don't have a glossary. Our glossary, we define the column headings, the business people name them, define them, and give them values. And behind the scenes, IT connects that glossary to the sources, to the data sources. So our models are fully independent of technology, including the execution technology and including the data. Organizations have switched data sources without changing their decision models. They just change the cross-reference. If you come on May 12th, you'll also learn that glossary is part of how we generate test cases and also how we find errors. How can you find an error in a logic row in a rule family if you don't know what the values for that, what you're testing is? If you don't know if something can be A, B, C, or D, then how do you know when they test for F it's wrong? So our glossary is integral with our principles. So here's the big question, what to do? We have competing models. We have one that's rigorous and been around a long time. We have one that's more general. It's not been around a long time. The best of both worlds, in my opinion, is to leverage both. You can't really leverage both right at this moment. So if you're doing manual decision models, you can play with both and see which one you like to use for your particular project. So selecting a tool, and again, there will be more tools coming out, will depend on where you want to go. You can just want to sketch your models and turn them over as a diagram to your IT people, or you can go straight through processing, and I'm going to talk about that more because that's something new, or not. It's not new to us, but it will be new probably to most of you, and this is beyond what I ever expected, and it's really exciting. So this is what our clients do. Okay, the idea is if you're going to introduce decision modeling in your organization, you can just have it replace your current business rules approach. And that's what our initial clients did. And it will be faster than what you're doing today. And then you turn it over to IT because now they should understand what decision models look like and now they know what to do with them. So that's really good. But what if you could change the governance of those decision models and move it more into the business analyst and business people's realm? This is what they're doing today to do that and what the benefits are. So notice here we have defined a new world with a fully customizable life cycle. And it begins with a business request that's carried out in the business community by business people or business analysts, and they study it, and they do impact analysis, everything they do today. They might even look at existing decision models if it's a change to an existing one. From here, they generate a change document, and we go into the second silo. In the second silo, decision modeling happens, validation against principles, and testing all happen in this silo. And it can happen, they build the decision model and the glossary, never going to IT. They do the validation of the decision model against the principles over and over and over until they get all the errors out. They can generate test cases, and they can validate decision flows. You can create a flow of decision model to decision model, and then you can test it. And then you make sure that your decision model and glossary is all up to date, and you move it over to IT. So what happens, all in a typical requirements life cycle, this doesn't happen like this. Like I have some numbers for you here. When you turn it to IT, they can manually connect the glossary to data sources, or they can manually generate Java or whatever, or they can use deployment adapters and actually make it go automatically. And this is actually real. This is going on real today. So what does that mean? To me, it's not just the model. I'm very excited about the model because I came up with it, but all this other stuff I'm talking to you about, I didn't come up with that. And it's amazing to see how it's changing things. It's changing business and technology. So here is an example of what you might be doing today. You scope your requirements. You do some discovering and analyzing, and you author and you create your business rule lists, and then you review and validate them, and you implement them, and you start testing, and you eventually get into UAT, and then you find errors, and you go back and forth, and it takes a lot of time. So by following what you just saw is what if we take that silo and we create this. So what we do is we scope, that we discover, we model, we validate, we against the principles, and we test all here. Look what happens to your life cycle. And it reduces from months to weeks to days, and I think Freddie Mac talked about how many days it took them to handle Storm Sandy compared to in the past for the same number of changes. So these are real, this is absolutely positively happening today. Why do the clients not talk about them? Because you're looking at the largest banks and mortgage companies, and insurance now is getting more involved in this, and they consider this very proprietary. So they are not going public, so that makes it difficult for us to quote from them, but you'll see them at some of our client meetings and things like that, and they talk about what they've been able to do. So we have about 10 minutes left, so I just want to leave you with where the 6 levels of decision management maturity. I'm assuming that most of you are just beginning, and that's perfectly fine. That's a great place to be because we've gotten most of the kinks out for you. And DMN is just more powerful. I mean, DMN is just going to make everybody talking about decision modeling and decision management, so it's not a secret thing anymore. But I have a page here. It's my last page of maturity. And maybe you guys have seen this maturity model in the past. We're not going to look at the model, the full model here in the past, because maybe you have it already, or if you get a handle on this presentation or whatever, you can look at it in all the details. What's more important are the levels, and this is in terms of what kind of software do you need, and not only what kind of software do you need now, but what will you need further, and when you look at vendors, where are they going on this maturity level? Are they just a sketching tool? Are they going to give you that full life cycle where you can change your stewardship and governance more into the business people? And those are the questions you really want to have in the back of your mind. But here's the good thing. The really good thing is because of DMN in particular, it means that the tool you pick today doesn't have to be the tool you'll have 3 years from now. Because with DMN, we will be able to exchange models from one tool to another. So you can go with a tool that's just a sketching tool, and 2 years from now you might want to go full life cycle, and you should be able to import it into another more mature tool and then go on with your life cycle. So to me, that's one of the big values of DMN. So it's going to be a race among vendors. I think the next 12 months will be quite interesting. So let me just go over the levels, and then I'm going to just finish up with one message from Sapiens. If you're at level 0, that means you don't want to manage your decision logic or your business rules any better than you're doing today, then you don't need any tool, right? But if level 1 is all you want to do is you want a visible, you want to see the diagram, whether it's a DMN diagram or a TDM diagram, you need a sketching tool. You need something that's going to draw the pictures, but you can't execute it, right? And then you just create those models in that kind of a tool, and you turn it over to IT, and IT does their normal thing. If you want agility, you need a modeling and execution tool, a tool that's going to take your picture, find your errors, and it maybe allow you to do some testing, and then it can automatically execute in a target technology, like a business rule engine. And in that case, it's maybe a project at a time, so just not your whole enterprise, but just maybe to rules, for example. If you want to go to level 3, you want to be aligned, you want an enterprise perspective of decision models. You want cross-project views. I have a view for New Jersey and New York and California, so I have 3 different decision models for the same thing. I want to deploy to any execution environment in my enterprise. Sometimes Drools, sometimes iLog, sometimes both. Maybe I want to get rid of iLog because I get Drools for free. I want that ability. Then I need an enterprise suite. And then we get into more advanced, I want to do predictive and autonomic decisioning, and that's where I talk about the innovation, is if you can start to capture the decisions that your production systems are making, and then you find that too many mortgages are failing or too many fraudulent things are happening, you can go and revisit your conditions and conclusions analytically and say, how can I improve those decisions going forward? And so that's the higher levels. And so to wrap up with what Sapiens has announced as of January, and this is interesting, but there are more interesting things coming. So basically, they announced in January that analysts have been making predictions, and the decision modeling and management is here. It's like the new thing, and we also published some of our customer references. They also announced the Decision Suite. So there's the Decision Suite has several pieces. They have an info hub. I'll talk about that in a minute. We have decision services. So we actually have the decision modeling capability, the decision model deployment capability. Info hub is a virtualization of data. It's from the big data space, and it's a product that can help you go out and find your data sources and generate the data that you need each time you execute a decision. That's just the tip of the iceberg, because what we have found in practice is decision models, they don't need to be tuned. They execute very well in every technology that we have tried. Unlike in the data world, where we used to have to go and add indexes and do denormalization to get things to perform. They perform very well. Where the problem and the time is spent is connecting those decision models to the data that it needs. Going out there, finding all the data sources, ETLing it, and putting it somewhere. And this is the Info Hub was our very exciting announcement in January that does that for you. So we're trying to make that agility, that productivity even faster. So they were doing some rebranding. There will be some more announcements in May. So if they're announced before May 12th, I will be able to share this with you. And And that's the end of the formal presentation. Do we have, do we have questions coming in?
Hi, yes, we do have a couple of questions people texted or chatted to me. And if anyone has any other questions, please chat them in and I'll get to them. First is, you kind of covered this, but it wasn't specific. Who usually creates the decision model? Is it geared more towards a business analyst or the business people themselves? Because you kind of said they both deal with it, but it's...
well, I'll tell you, it's interesting. When we first started doing it in some of the mortgage industry, actually some of the business people were doing it because business analysts didn't know how to do it. And so neither did business people, but we actually trained everybody. And so business people were doing it. But today, I'd say our clients are more mature, and today their business analysts are doing it. It's either business analysts or they also have decision modeling people. So sometimes the business analysts are the decision modelers, and sometimes they actually have a new role called decision modeler who works with the business analyst. And then there's also the glossary administrator, and that always gets washed over, because the glossary administrator is the person who's going to make this all work. They're the ones that are going to connect to IT, and they should know, they understand the data they have, the data they don't have. So I would say usually it's the business analyst or a decision modeler role, and then you'll have a glossary role also.
So for the glossary administrator, since that sounds like a new role, new position, what current skills, like are there BA skills that would transfer to that a BA could create that role for themselves in an organization?
Yes, and actually I think more often than not, the glossary administrator is a business analyst. They need to be someone who understands the business and can communicate with the business people, with your SMEs. It's also good if they know what data is available. So sometimes they come from the data administration group, but it's not necessary for them to be a data person. It's just necessary for them to know who to go to. So the glossary is truly driven by the business people. The glossary names are all in natural language. There are no underscores. There's no numbers. They'll call it mortgage application indicator. And then, the glossary administrator defines it and everything else, and then has to go find out, do we have this data, right? So it's definitely more of a business analyst type.
Okay. And you mentioned, besides the glossary administrator, what other roles are there on a decision model project? There are new roles to create, or so we could stay ahead of the game, I guess you could say, as a BA.
Okay. So typically you have a project sponsor like any project, right? In this case, it's usually important that this project sponsor is willing to try this new technique because it's new to your organization. It's usually a project manager, just like every other project, and there are business SMEs. The business SMEs tend to, and I can actually share May 12th the kinds of time you need from these people. The business SMEs have more of a role. They have more of a role because the decision model belongs to them, right? They start walking around with them, So business SMEs, decision modelers, typically one glossary administrator that oversees. If you have multiple decision modelers, you want everybody to be working off the same glossary. So typically one glossary administrator is needed. And then, of course, your IT developers and your DAs and DBAs when you're getting ready for deployment. The glossary, I'll just mention one other thing. If you're in a more sophisticated organization, you can have more than one glossary. The glossary goes with a community. So if I'm like if I'm like the medical insurance division, then I have a medical insurance glossary administrator, and if I'm in, home insurance, I have one for them. So you can have multiple glossaries, but everybody doing decision models within that community use the same glossary.
Okay. One person asked, I don't know if you can see it, have you witnessed decision modeling used in the retail sector, namely retail electronics? I guess maybe they're talking brick and mortar like Best Buy, but that could also be online like Crutchfield. So.
I have not, but I don't know if I would know. But I can find out. I can find out. See, I have not heard of any in the retail sector. New sectors are coming. It's funny. This is all new to me to learn which industries tend to adopt new things first. And I don't think retail is usually one of the ones that jumps in there. But if whoever that person is, if you want to send me an email, I'll be more than happy to find out for you.
Okay, and I think your email is on the bottom of our registration page, so they can just go to the event itself and see your email at the bottom. Another question someone wrote is, what is the best reference to look into for decision models? Some more. Are event models covered in your book, The Decision Model? So what are the places to look for more information on the decision model?
Okay, more information on the decision model. Our book is still the top reference for the decision model. It has all the principles, like I said. You can also get a primer from the Sapiens website, which basically summarizes the actual notation. So that's on the decision model. DMN, I mentioned already, Bruce Silver's book, and the event model. The event model is not documented in a book or anything at this point in time, but it will be presented at the DEBS conference, and I think the paper may become public. The event model will, if anyone is really interested in the event model and really interested in doing a pilot, you should definitely contact me. Because we would be very happy to do that. I know there's been some work in Europe, and we have it. Sapiens just hasn't been pushing it because they're so busy doing everything else right now. But I do know that that it will probably come to fruition. So if people are interested in it right now as just a model, as a picture, we'd be more than happy to talk to you about that.
Okay. And do you have any reference or recommendations for how we can start experimenting with decision model? Like, I don't know if there's templates for Visio or for Excel or anything else you might be knowledgeable about.
Okay, yes, if you want to experiment, I would say if you have a current project in place and you identify a particular decision that happens during that process model, just pick that decision and say, let's go for it, let's try it. Yes, there are templates. Here's the hard part. The templates are on the KPI USA website. They're not on the Sapiens website. They're still on the kpiusa.com. So, and I know I checked the other day, they're still there. So you can go there and download both the Visio and the Excel, and if for some reason you can't find them there, just contact me on email and I'll send them to you.
Great. Do we have any more questions? Yeah, I can see it's almost 1 o'clock, so some people might start logging off.
Well, let me just say one thing. I hope you guys come to the May 12th presentation. I will show you some real-world rule families that were taken from regulatory compliance, and just eyeballing them from what you're going to learn on May 12th, you'll be able to spot errors and say, look at that. And in the old days, you wouldn't. You would have had sentences for each one, and you would have gone through testing, and maybe you would have found them, and maybe you wouldn't. So I hope you come. It should be an exciting time.
Okay, yeah, I'll put that on the screen again. Yeah, so definitely come to the UPS next on May 12th. There's exercises. Whatever you learn now, you'll definitely stay with you better if you do exercises with it. Okay, then if no one else has any more questions, then I'd like to thank Barbara for her time and very interesting session. And look forward to seeing some of you or all of you at the May 12th event in UPS in Wayne. Thank you all for attending.
Thank you.